Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Before we begin, I would like to take this opportunity to extend my thanks to the community for inviting me. We're honored to be here, especially for the days of Ayyam Fatimiyya. So thank you again for inviting us. Inshallah, we look forward to making friends and serving Ahl al-Bayt. Salamullahi alayhim ajma'een, inshallah. Let us begin with the Surah Al-Fatiha for the thawab and all of our marhumeen, please. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين خاتم النبيين سيدنا الممجد بشير المصدق المصطفى الأمجد محمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد
وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين ولعنة الله على الظالمين من الأولين والآخرين أما بعد قالت سيدتنا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة نساء العالمين أنتم عباد الله نصب أمره ونهيه وحملة دينه ووحيه وأمناء الله على أنفسكم وبلغاؤه إلى آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم وصدق رسول الكريم والحمد لله رب العالمين صلوات على محمد وآل محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Awaited Savior of humanity, Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, my respected elders, brothers and sisters, Salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we commemorate these days of Ayyam Fatimiyya, we begin by extending our condolences to the awaited Savior of humanity, the Master and Lord of our age, Imam al-Mahdi Ajjalallahu Ta'ala Faraj al-Sharif. Imagine that in these days he is frequenting the holy city of Medina, where his great-grandmother Fatima Zahra alayhi salam is buried, and that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sincerely for the opportunity to perform her ziyarah, inshaAllah, this year, every year, fi dunya wal akhirah. The discussion I want to bring this evening is concerning the definition of what is the ideal woman. We have, of course, this great lady, Fatima Zahra, Sayyidati Nisa al-Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Fatima Zahra, who is the foremost lady of all of the worlds. May God have showered His peace and blessings be upon her. How do we define this great lady? What is it that makes her so great? And if you and I want to have partners, if we want to raise our children, if we want our sisters, if we want to identify the qualities that made her Sayyidati Nisa al-Alameen, this grand lady that trumps all other women of this world, how is it that I can set a definition of that greatness in her? And ultimately, if I want to be able to become that great myself, if I want to be able to identify those characteristics within my own children, my family members, my partners, how is it that I'm able to do so? In order for us to do this, we need to look at the various ideas and discussions that defines the greatness of a woman, both within the traditions of Islam, and also think about how is it that the rest of the world defines the greatness of a woman. Immediately we realize that such a discussion is very important because much focus and attention of the non-Muslim world is placed upon Islam today, but also focused specifically within the dynamic of how Islam treats and how Islam thinks about a woman. We normally hear that discussion that because a woman is in her hijab, because she is modestly dressed, somehow that equates to her being oppressed. Somehow that equates to her not being able to live a fulfilled life. And so, in order to react to this, the Western media or the liberal media wants to push the agenda of the opposite being true. That the less you are dressed means the more free that you are, the more emboldened you are in life, the more opportunity you have within life. And so we have a clash of worlds here. We have a clash of civilizations. How we judge ourselves, how we judge the definition of greatness are clashing with each other. One suggests the greatness of a person is found within how modest they are within society, how they grace society. Another will say, if they walk the catwalk, if they are free in these ways, that is how we judge the greatness of them. There is a clash here. And so, we want to understand this for ourselves internally, but also externally, that when we engage in the wider debate, in case you and I have the debate in school, in university, in the workplace, someone from within our own community challenges us, we want to understand what defines the greatness of a woman so that we can have that within our own society, but also be able to portray that within the wider society as well, as there is so much discussion around this issue. Here, we have to go and ask ourselves, primarily, how is it that Islam has historically defined the greatness of a woman? And here comes a very interesting debate. And this debate we want to have some detailed discussion around to try to understand the definition of the ideal woman in 2015 in the world that we live in today. If you look at the hadith and you look at the narrations that have come to us, we end up having a discussion around what is the ideal woman, and normally, historically, we are told that the ideal woman is defined in two remits. One, in terms of her matrimonial duties, and two, in terms of her maternal duties. What do we mean? When you see the history, and when you see academic works, when you see the history of our ahadith and the corpus of our narrations, when you look at our communities and how they have progressed to now, there is normally a discussion that says the ideal woman is defined by her matrimonial duty and the quality of that, and her maternal duty and the quality of that. What are those two things? The matrimonial duties are those in which she expresses her responsibilities, fulfills her responsibilities as a wife towards a husband. The matrimonial sense, how she takes care of her husband, how she fulfills the needs of her husband. The other is the maternal duties, meaning how she looks after the needs of her children, how she brings up her children, how schooled her children are. And normally we find these because the ahadith tell us so much about the responsibility of a wife to do with her husband and to do with her children. For example, we have two or three very famous narrations as examples from Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. It says, the best woman in the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who serves her husband the best. Narration. How do we define a woman? Another narration again from Rasulullah Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. The worst of wives are those who allows her husband to go to sleep angry with her. You see here, the best and the worst is defined upon her matrimonial duties. It is based upon the way in which she treats her husband, the way in which her husband feels about her. And so the ethic of the discussion, the ethic of the community has always been to define the woman based upon her matrimonial duties. How does her husband feel about her? There's another hadith that says about this issue that if a woman was to leave the house and spray upon her cologne or rather, scent upon her, any perfume upon her, for the sake of being smelt by another man, God's curse or the angels curse her from the time she leaves her house to the time she returns to her house. You see, all these narrations are speaking about matrimonial duties. It speaks about the relationship between the husband and wife. And so when we think about it, often we've been told primarily the responsibility, the definition of the ideal woman is in regards to her relationship with her husband. Elsewhere, we see the discussion about her children. And so we define the greatness of a woman by how she brings up her children, how educated they are, how much akhlaq they have, whether they do well in society or otherwise. And straight away we point at the mother as the primary caregiver within the family. And we say the child has done brilliantly in their exams. The child has done fantastically in the community. The mother has taught them well. Here, this levies the responsibility to the mother. And so we define the ideal woman in these ways. The challenge comes because when you ask someone today and you say, do you define the ideal woman today in 2015 solely by her matrimonial duties or by her maternal duties? Is that where you limit the ideal woman? Most of us here would say no. Why? Because often when a brother says he wants to get married, he won't just think about her in light of how well she cooks or just what she's going to do with the children. The question will often come beyond this. And even for a woman herself to feel satisfied with her life's output in 2015 will not be solely confined and restricted to how well I roll the roti or how well I roll the money. True? It won't be defined in this way. But the hadith says that we define the woman by her matrimonial duties and by her maternal responsibilities. And so we've always thought within these paradigms. So we define Fatima Zahra alayhi salam and say that she is primarily a wife to her husband and primarily a mother to her children. She only went out to claim fadak out of necessity. This is what we end up saying. Seyeda Zainab salamullahi alayha was primarily a wife and primarily a mother. Only when she was faced with conflict did she go into the courtyard of Ibn Ziyad and Yazid ibn Muawiyah la'natullahi alayhima and say, now I want my rights for my brother. This is what Islam preaches. And so we work within this paradigm that says she is primarily within the house and the auxiliary duty is upon necessity of her standing up for her rights. Here, we pose that question. Is that how you and I define the ideal woman today? That she is primarily based within the house and only when necessity calls upon her, she goes out of the house? Let me give you an example. I remember I was studying in the holy city of Karbala, and this was a discussion that took place 2 years ago. So we're only talking very recently. And amongst the Hawza students were a number of brothers that had come from Yemen. And as you know, there had been much strife in Yemen. Until now, there is much strife taking place in Yemen. And so they had to leave in order to gain safety. And they came to Karbala and they joined the Hawza and they were discussing. We were discussing this issue of women's rights the role of women in society, and obviously looking at it through the Quran and the Ahadith and the paradigm of the great ladies of Ahl al-Bayt, Lady Khadija, Lady Zahra, Lady Zainab, Lady Kulthum, Salamullahi alayhunna. Now, the brother from Yemen was defining what it was like or is like for his wife in Yemen. He had a wife who resided in Yemen, and he came to Karbala to study, and he would go back every so often. So we asked him, what's it like for your wife? Give us a day-to-day scenario of what it's like for your wife within Yemen today. Listen to this paradigm, listen to this statement, and understand the discussion about how we see the discussion of women's rights in Islam 1400 years ago in an Arabian paradigm, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Pakistan, in India, in London, in Edinburgh. The brother from Yemen says, my wife, when she needs something in the house, she wants some shopping done, something breaks down, she needs something delivered, she does not go out and get it herself. She calls my father, also in Yemen, she calls my father, her father-in-law, and says, I need A, B, and C. I need these groceries picking up. I need the meat. I need whatever. Something has broken down in the house. I need something done. And he goes out to get my groceries and brings them to me. That's the reality of their circumstances. She does not go out for groceries herself. She has to call her father-in-law to go and get groceries to bring them to the house whilst her husband is away. This is the paradigm that they live in. And so when we discussed that here in the West, the role of a woman is envisioned differently, he couldn't fathom it. He says, what do you mean a woman works independently and has her own business? What do you mean that a woman stands for position in politics? What do you mean a woman is a teacher in public schools teaching men? What do you mean? This doesn't make sense. This is in opposition to Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. Because the hadith tell us that her primary role was within her responsibilities to her husband and her responsibilities to her children. What you're telling me is in opposition to Lady Khadija, in opposition to Lady Fatima, in opposition to Lady Zainab, because they only left the house when it was necessary for them to leave the house. We say, what do you mean? And he comes back with hadith, very famous hadith that you will know about. For example, the famous tradition from the commander of the faithful, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. And he says famously after the wedding, and he draws a line in the sand, doesn't he? And he says, everything outside this line, I am responsible for. And everything inside this line, meaning within the house, O Fatima, you are responsible for. Now that makes perfect sense. But if you think about it in the Yemeni paradigm, the way in which they manifest that, the way in which they inculcate that, it is very literal. Literally, she does not go outside for the groceries. Literally, if the boiler breaks down, if the heating breaks down, if something happens, she does not go outside of the house. She calls her husband or she calls her father-in-law, I need A, B, and C to be brought for me. Or another tradition from Her Eminence herself, Lady Fatima Zahra, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayha. She says, famously, the best thing for a woman is not to be seen by another man. Now, if you bring that tradition to the sister in Yemen, in her paradigm, the way in which her society is, that tradition makes sense in the way in which she understands it. Does it work in the way in which we understand it? If we applied it today here in Edinburgh, if we applied it in London, if we applied it in New York, does it work in the same way? No. Do you ascribe the definition of the ideal woman as primarily and solely to be her matrimonial duties or her maternal duties? Do you limit and confine her to that? We would say no. We want more for our daughters. We want more for our sisters. Our wives want more. They themselves want more. They are educated. They want to be at the forefront of education. They want to be engaged in politics, in media. They feel they can go out and teach. Their role is not just defined in that way. Their role is defined by how they serve within the greater remit of society itself. Is that in opposition to Zahra alayhi salam? Or is it that we have misunderstood these ahadith and we haven't understood the plethora of these narrations in their entirety? Here, the non-Muslim world wants to say that a woman in Islam is oppressed. She is confined. She is limited. Is this what we see from Her Eminence Seyeda Zahra alayhi salam? Is this how we define the ideal woman or not? And so, in order for understanding this, we need to do two things. Firstly, we need to go back into the history of Arabia, and then we need to see specific incidents in the life of Seyeda Zahra alayhi salam and see how she acted in those circumstances relative to her time. And see that when we juxtapose those to the environment that we live in today, we might see a different story altogether. The definition of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam as the ideal woman is not limited to her matrimonial and her maternal duties. Her matrimonial and maternal duties make up part of her being the ideal woman. Let us see this, inshallah. The first thing for us to discuss is how the Arab society was at the time of Islam engaging, particular to women, and ultimately where Zahra alayhi salam stood within that paradigm. There are many ayat of the Quran, of course, that discuss the reality of the situation of the Quraysh Meccan Bedouin community at the time of revelation. One primary verse brings an insight to the type of community that Rasulullah had to come to. It says in Surah Al-Hijr, chapter number 15 of the Holy Quran, فَلَعَمْرُكَ إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَقْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath by the life of Rasulullah. You know, in Quran, sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala takes an oath by the sun, or by the moon, or by time itself, right? وَالشَّمْسِ وَضُحَاهَا وَالْقَمَرِ إِلَى تَلَاهَا وَالْعَصْرِ, and so on and so forth. Here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't take an oath by the sun, or by the moon. He takes an oath by the life of Rasulullah. You know, sometimes when we say, I swear on your life it happened. It's like that. But Allah Ta'ala makes an oath by Rasulullah's life. The greatest thing in existence. فَلَعَمْرُكَ, I swear by your existence, O Muhammad, إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَقْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. Most surely, these Arabs, they are wandering blindly in their intoxications. Here, intoxications doesn't mean alcohol. It means the way in which they used to live. What did they used to do as a community? They used to perform tawaf of the Holy Kaaba naked, singing, clapping and dancing. Can you imagine a community more morally bereft than one that used to perform their pilgrimage naked? This community, they used to make idols with their own hands and then worship them, thinking that they had power over them. Can you imagine a community more intellectually limited, that I make something with my own hands and then say, benefit me, O God? It doesn't benefit itself or harm itself, let alone being able to benefit me or harm me. This was the community that Rasulullah came to. In regards to women specifically, what were they like? What was the community like? Famously, we know they used to bury their daughters alive. It doesn't stop there. You know what else they used to do to women? There is a verse of the Holy Quran which says, وَلَا تَأْكُلُوا أَمْوَالَكُمْ بَيْنَكُمْ بِالْبَاطِلِ. Do not eat up your wealth in falsities. Our sixth Imam, Jaffer Ladak, salawatullah salamuhu alayhi, comments on this hadith. He says, you know what they used to do? The Arab communities, they used to have massive gambling games. And when they lost, when there was debt accumulated on their gambling, they didn't pay off the debt with money or with trade or with camels like you might have done in a Bedouin society. You know what they used to do? They used to sell their women off, family members, in order to pay off the debt. It's literally like me saying to you, you get into debt, and instead of selling your car to raise funds to pay off your debt, you would sell your sister. You would sell your grandmother. You would sell your auntie. This is what they used to do in Arabia. Can you imagine a community that looked down upon its women more, that when you had debt, you would actually have the audacity to sell off your own sister? Your sister, your blood. Women used to be inherited like property. So, when your father died, you inherited your mother and you could decide how much you could sell her for. Your mother, the woman that gave birth to you. Islam said, paradise is found underneath the feet of your mother. Look at how much in opposition, antithetical the Arab customs were to Islam itself. This is what women were like, how they were treated at that time. And so, as it came, the Holy Prophet of Islam had to engage in reforming the minds of this community that were so deviant in their morality. فَلَعَمْرُكَ إِنَّهُمْ لَفِي سَقْرَتِهِمْ يَعْمَهُونَ. Surely these people are wandering blindly in their intoxications. What did he do? He started to open the minds of this community, dropping in small ideas to them. What did he say? He said, instead of you inheriting a woman, they now inherit property themselves. Instead of you being able to give away a woman out of debt, she now has the ability to stand and testify in the courts. Instead now, a woman, instead of having no education for her, teach her how to read and write. In fact, when you get married to a woman, teach her how to do mathematics and how to count, so that when she enters into your house, and if she is spending your money, she doesn't know how to count, then how is she going to spend money equivalently? You're going to bring home 10 dirham, and she's going to be spending 50 dirham. What's going to happen to you? You're going to go bankrupt within the space of a week. Now think about this very closely, brothers and sisters. Rasulullah, may God's peace and blessings be upon him and his noble family, said, when you get married, teach your women how to count. Why? Because 1400 years ago, a woman was so uneducated, it was so out there, it was so unrealistic that a woman was educated that the Prophet had to tell people, educate your wives. I'm asking a simple question, brothers and sisters. Women today, is it possible that when you get married, the Maulana will come on the pulpit and say, brother, you're about to get married, you're about to have your nikah, make sure she learns how to read and write? Is that possible? Is that going to happen? Why? Because they're more educated than us today. They're in universities, they're in the workplace, they're teachers, they're politicians, they're accountants, they're lawyers, they're pharmacists, they're doctors, they're dentists. What kind of idea would it be for the Maulana to go up on the pulpit and say, by the way, brother, make sure she knows how to read and write tomorrow after the nikah? We live in a completely different world. We are not Bedouins. We do not live in the 7th century Arabia. We have to understand the paradigm that Rasulullah came to. And so when historically a woman and the ideal woman was defined, historically they were defined by primarily their matrimonial duties and their maternal duties. An auxiliary, a secondary facet to them was if necessity came, they went out to the courtyard and spoke out against a tyrannical leader. We don't have that society today. A woman is defined completely differently. The question is, have we misunderstood the definition of the ideal woman in the first place? When we said the ideal woman is historically defined by matrimonial and maternal duties, have we understood that correctly or misunderstood Fatima Zahra alayha salam essentially for what she did and completely skewered the reality of what a woman is supposed to be in society? Either our definition of the ideal woman evolves, or when we say the ideal woman is defined by matrimony, by maternal, by education, by society, by her teaching, it was always those things in the first place. Which one? Here we come to the look at the life of Her Eminence. And we see the way in which she was. And we see the way in which she practiced her time in the 18 years that God gave to her in this world. What did we say? We said the ideal woman is defined in a number of ways. Yes, matrimony. Yes, maternal. But we also said that we want her to be educated. We might see that she wants to engage in the business world. She might be a teacher of people. She might be engaged in politics. She should be aware of what's taking place in the media, so that this is part and parcel of her essentially, not as an auxiliary. Do we see this in part and parcel of Zahra alayhi salam, or do we see these facets of her as an auxiliary, secondary facet to her? Here, the answer comes very simply when you analyze and study her life. Let us take 4 very simple incidents in her life and see as to whether we've understood the definition of the perfect woman in humanity. Number 1, Fadak. Fadak was a land that was given to her after it was lost by the Jews of Medina. The land of Fadak is a huge land. It would be worth millions today in property value, tens, maybe even hundreds of millions, because of the width of the land and how many square kilometers that land was. Fadak was never an inheritance to Zahra alayhi salam. When she came to claim it, the argument from Abu Bakr against her was, prophets don't inherit, and therefore there is no way that you can inherit this from your father. Of course, his interpretation was entirely fictitious and for the purpose of stealing the land. There is no dispute upon this historically. But the fact of the matter is that this was not an inheritance given to her. This was given to her during her life. Do you know she had this land for a number of years? And do you know that underneath her, she managed this land and she had hundreds of workers in that land, tilling the land, producing from the land, and selling from the land? She, as a woman, as a young woman of 15 years old, had a business that in today's terms would be worth hundreds of millions of pounds. Literally, at 15 years old. And she managed it, she governed it. She didn't give it to her husband, Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. She herself was responsible for the organization of Fadak. This is why when she came back to claim it, she says, this is my property all along. I have been managing this property all along. Do you now seek to take this wealth away from Ahl al-Bayt? Now here, it is hard to argue and say that Zahra alayhi salam was defined only by her matrimonial and by her maternal duties when she held a business probably worth more than a business any of us could ever carry in this world. Either she was a businesswoman and this was part and parcel of her, or this was auxiliary. If this was auxiliary, why was she doing it so well as part and parcel of her daily life all the time? She was a businesswoman, like her mother Khadija salamullahi alayha. Her mother was the greatest businesswoman in the whole of Arabia. It is not surprising Fatima Zahra was also one of the greatest businesswomen within Arabia. But we have limited her to say that she is a wife to her husband and she is a mother to her children. She was not. She was the eminent business lady of her time, like her mother was the eminent business lady of her time. Why can't our women also be the eminent businesswomen of their time? Number one. Number two, she was directly engaged in the politics of her time. When Khilafat was stolen from Ahl al-Bayt, she leaves the house and she goes straight to the place in which the political institution was present and engaged the political discourse by virtue of being aware of what was taking place, having the confidence and the tongue to be able to speak about the politics of the time. You have corrupted the politics of Islam. What does she say? If only the Muslims were to follow my husband and my two sons, from now until the end of time, by God, there would not be a single Muslim that would disagree in their belief systems. SubhanAllah. Was it auxiliary to her, or was it part and parcel of her lifetime? She was engaged in politics. Number three, the masjid at that time, Masjid Nabawi, was the media center for everything. Here, we have Twitter, we have Facebook, yes, we have Instagram. And the moment you want to send some word out of what's going on in the world, it goes out. You know, there was a statistic, a very interesting thing that I read, or actually I watched on a TED talk about 3 days ago. There was on the 5th of September 2012 in Costa Rica an earthquake. And the epicenter, you know, it was like a 6.2. And it took 1 minute for the shock waves to go from the epicenter to 100 miles away. It took 60 seconds for someone to tweet about the event and to reach Canada. But they didn't have that society then. What happened? You came to the masjid to get the media news. When you wanted to know what was the news of the ummah, what was revelation, what was taking place, you came to the center point. You didn't go away from the center point. Zahra alayhi salam walks into the middle of the media center of the Muslim ummah and challenges what is being told by the media publication of that time. We have Fox News, we have Sky News, we have BBC, we have CNN, and they're all telling you something or the other. She was engaged in media to the point when she went into the media politics of the very center point in order to engage the dialogue. Number four, she engaged with the peak of her hijab. She did not compromise her hijab one iota. Because the hadith specify, this is not an interpretation, this is a hadith that describe the event of the khutbah of Fadak. It says that as Zahra alayhi salam exited her house, she was wearing a chadar, an abaya, that was so loose and long so as not to show the parts of her body. she had to carry it like this. She had to pick it and carry it, lest it drag along the floor because of how loose it was. Same thing, sometimes our sisters, if you see them in full abaya, they have to pick up the abaya slightly, lest it drags on the ground and becomes dusty or becomes dirty. Say, pick up your abaya so it doesn't become wet, it doesn't drag along the ground. Same thing that Her Eminence was doing. When she engaged, she didn't compromise on her hijab. And number 5, the most incredible point, she was fully engaged in the da'wah of Islam. I have with me a hadith from herself, Her Eminence, Lady Fatima Zahra, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayha. An amazing statement in one of the great books called A'yan al-Shi'a. She says in the following statement, 4 lines. Think about this statement from herself and how she defines the ideal woman. Antum ibadallahi nusbu amrihi wa nahyihi. You are the servants of Allah. In which way? Nusbu amrihi wa nahyihi. So that you may bring forth His commands and His prohibitions. Now she says this, in which way? Antum. Generally, to male and female. She is speaking to male and female. Not just female. Otherwise we antunna, just female. Antum, male and female. Antum ibadallahi nusbu amrihi wa nahyihi. You are responsible to bring forth God's commands and His prohibitions. Wa hamalatu dinihi wa wahyihi. And to carry upon your shoulders His religion and His revelation. This is the statement from Her Eminence. Responsibilities. وَأُمَنَاءَ اللَّهِ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِكُمْ. And you are responsible to Allah. You are the trustworthy of Allah upon yourself. The trust of Allah is upon you. وَبُلَغَاؤُهُ إِلَىٰ أُمَمٍ. Listen to this last statement from Her Eminence. وَبُلَغَاؤُهُ إِلَىٰ أُمَمٍ. And you are responsible to do tabligh. Bulagha. You are responsible to do tabligh ila ummam. The singular is ummah. The jama', the plural is ummam. You are responsible to tabligh to all of the various ummas of this world. Now she is telling women and she is telling men. Antum, men and women. If a woman's role in Islam is defined by her being in the house, how is it that Fatima Zahra says, go out and do tabligh to the whole world? When we have our campaigns like Who is Hussein, when we go out into the streets and hand out bottles of water, when we hand out flowers, we are doing what Fatima Zahra alayha salam told us to do in our paradigm in 2015. It is because she told us to teach, go out there and preach, partake in society. She was a businesswoman. Let us make our sisters the leaders in the business worlds. She was a woman engaged in politics. Let's teach our sisters to be engaged in politics. She was a woman engaged in media. Let us help our sisters to get into media. She was a teacher. Let our sisters become teachers. She told us to do tabligh. Why is it that we think that we need to stop women from engaging in our communities and societies? Here, when we define the ideal woman, it is as simple as this. It is the balanced human being. Be you male or be you female. As long as you are balanced in fulfilling all of your responsibilities to God, that is within the house, that is to your children, that is to the madrasa, that is to the mosque, it is to the Imam Bargha, it is to the wider society, that is when you are the ideal man or ideal woman in this world. The moment something is in decline and I'm not engaging in society, or I'm not engaging in the community, or I'm not looking after my spouse, I'm not looking after my children fully, the imbalance comes, that is when I am no longer the ideal person. It is as simple as that. And this is what we want to show as the ideal person in our society. So that when the non-Muslim world judges Islam, they don't judge the Islam which is being defined by other people, but defined by those who follow Fatima Zahra, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayha, properly.
आवाज़ें बुलंद है, सलवात।
Which Islam do you want? Do you want to be the Islam of Aisha and Hafsa? Do you want to be the Islam of Khadija al-Kubra, Fatima Zahra, Sayyidat al-Nisa, or Sayyida Zainab, al-Masa'ib, or Sayyida Kulthum, al-Nawwah? Which one do you want to represent? And this evening, my brothers and sisters, we have gathered in order to say that we represent Fatima Zahra alayhi salam. And we wish to send our condolences to the awaited Saviour of humanity, for his grandmother was attacked in a way which is almost incomprehensible to imagine. When you think about a woman, you know how soft-hearted she is, how kind she is, how she will do anything to protect her children from harm. And then you think about a pregnant lady and how much extra care you give to such a woman. The way in which you know that her body is precious, that she is carrying a child, that you make sure nothing comes to her. She is looked after in the best of ways. You open the car door for her. You make sure she is seated comfortably. You do not want stress to come to her. Why is it that yet when Fatima is pregnant, they would come to the house with sticks and with swords and with fire blazing ready for that house? This was the house that whenever Rasulullah would leave on an expedition, he would first go to that house and bid farewell. And when he would return back from the expedition, his first stop would be to that house of Fatima Zahra. And when he was passing away from this world, he was in that house. His head is placed upon the lap of Fatima. It is said that at that moment, a man is knocking at the door. Zahra says, "Please leave and go away." The man continues to knock. She begins to cry. The tears awaken her father, Rasulullah. Rasulullah says, "Oh my dear daughter Fatima, why are you crying?" She says, "There is someone outside the door that is knocking and persisting. He will not leave. Please, I am crying because he will not depart from outside the door." Rasulullah responds by saying, "Oh Fatima, that is no ordinary man. That is the angel of death. He has come to seek my soul. He respects your door so much, Fatima Zahra, that he will not even enter into your house until you have given him permission." Yet those individuals, when they gathered outside the house, they gathered with 70 men. It is said that they went back and forth to Abu Bakr 3 times, and each time they gathered more men and more men and more men, and eventually the 3rd time they came with unsheathed swords, they came with sticks, they came with whips, they came with fire ready to attack the house of Fatima Zahra. They called out and said, "We're going to attack the house." One of them turned to Umar and said, "Oh Umar, do you not know that Fatima, the daughter of Rasulullah, the flower of Rasulullah, is inside that house?" His response is, "By God, I do not care whether she is inside the house or not." This is recorded in the books of all schools. He says, "By God, I do not care if Fatima is inside the house." They command and they demand, "Oh Ali, come out, because we want allegiance from you." At this moment, Fatima Zahra comes towards the door. She stands behind the door and she says, "I will not allow you to enter into the door." Umar, in a fit of rage, how evil he was towards women, disrespected Fatima Zahra so much that at this moment he begins to break the door down. Fatima is stood behind that door. It is said that the door begins to break as it falls upon her. She is crushed between the door and the wall. It is said that there is a nail that penetrates into the chest of Fatima Zahra. She is crushed between the door and the wall. She falls towards the floor. At this moment they begin to set the house alight. One narration says that 4 men or even up to 7 men enter into that house. There is Qunfudh, there is Khalid bin Walid, there is Umar bin al-Khattab, there is Mughira bin Shu'bah. Narrations say every one of those 4 men slapped the face of Fatima Zahra. Qunfudh and Umar, it is said, come and take a whip, and as Fatima comes to defend herself, they come and whip Zahra so harsh that it leaves a mark around her wrist, as if it was a bracelet around her wrist. As the door falls upon her, as they begin to strike her, as her rib begins to be crushed, the rib is broken inside her body. The door crushes her child Muhsin. She calls out, Wa Muhammada, Wa Abata, oh for our father Muhammad. It is said that she calls out, Fizza, come to my aid. The commentators say, oh Fatima, why did you call out for Fizza? Inside the house was your husband Ali ibn Abi Talib, the warrior and lion of God. Why did you call out for Fizza? It is said that she calls out for Fizza because she does not want to hurt Ali ibn Abi Talib at that moment. She doesn't want Ali to hear her cry in pain at that moment. Fizza, come to my aid. Fizza comes running towards her. She sees her princess underneath the door. She sees that her princess has been crushed. Oh Fatima Zahra, you can imagine that she must have pushed the door off from Fatima. The house must be set ablaze at this moment. The narration says that Ali ibn Abi Talib, like a lion, rushes out. He is surrounded by those 7 men, Umar and Qunfudh and Khalid and Mughira and the others. What do? They begin to attack Ali ibn Abi Talib. They begin to put a rope around his neck and they drag him out of a house. It is said that as they drag Ali ibn Abi Talib, they drag him like a camel. If you ever seen a camel, do you know how strong a camel is? When you try to drag a camel, it's because it is a strong animal. It will put up a fight. This is because Ali ibn Abi Talib put up a fight. Why? Not because he was scared to leave the house, but inside the house was his wife Fatima Zahra. You drag me out whilst my wife Fatima is still inside the house. I do not want to leave my wife while she has lost her child Muhsin. They drag Ali. They put a sword to his throat. They drag him into the Masjid of Nabawi. The narration says that as Umar puts the sword to his neck, Abu Bakr is sitting on top of the pulpit. At this moment, it is said that in her state, Fatima Zahra finds some strength, and in her left hand takes Hassan and Mujtaba. In her right hand takes Hussein al-Shahidi bi Karbala, and brings them inside Masjid Nabawi. At this moment, the sword is upon the neck of Ali ibn Abi Talib. Abu Bakr and Umar say to him, Oh Ali, if you do not give us bay'ah, we will slice your head here and now. We will cut you here and now. The narration says, at this moment, Hassan and Hussein begin to cry. They begin to see their father. They begin to cry at this moment at the thought that what's just happened to my mother. I'm about to lose my father as well. At this moment, the narration says, Ali ibn Abi Talib turns round towards Hassan and Hussein and says, Oh Hassan and Hussein, do not cry. Don't you know these people can never kill Ali ibn Abi Talib? Nor can they kill me physically, nor can they kill the history of whom Ali ibn Abi Talib is. After the days pass and so much trouble comes to the house, Every day Fatima Zahra would go towards the grave of her father Rasulullah and say, had this tragedy befallen upon me during the day, the whole world would have turned towards night. At this moment she begins to carry out her duties, but eventually she succumbs to the injuries of an internal bleeding upon her. It is said that she goes towards Fizza and says, Fizza, I am going into my private room now and I am going to recite Quran. As long as I recite Quran, you will know that I am alive. But when you hear my voice go quiet and no more recitation of Quran, come in to see what has happened to me. She begins to recite the Quran. Fizza is listening attentively. Oh Fizza, this is the moment when your princess is about to depart from this world. Eventually the voice of Fatima becomes quiet. Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. At this moment she enters into the room. She says, oh my dear mistress and lady Fatima, please wake up. Please wake up. Do not depart from me. There is a tumult within the house. Eventually this reaches Masjid Nabawi. Ali, Hassan and Hussein salamullahi alayhim ajma'een are inside the masjid. They run back towards the house of Fatima. As they enter into the house, listen to the first question of Imam al-Hassan. He says, oh Fizza, Aina Ummuna, where is our mother Fatima? Fizza does not say a word. All she does is look down. All she does is look down. How do you tell Imam al-Hassan that your mother has passed away? They rush into the house and look at their mother. They begin to throw themselves upon her and hold her tightly. As they do, they're calling out for their mother. Wa ummata, oh our mother, please do not leave us. Each of the sons and daughters are clamored around her. It is said famously at this moment, as Hassan and Hussein clamber upon the chest of their mother, it is said that there is a call from the sky. Jibreel calls out towards Ali ibn Abi Talib and says, oh Ali, tell Hassan and Hussein to please stop hugging Fatima. This scene is too disturbing for the angels to come and watch. We say, oh angels, if you could not bear to see Hussein upon the chest of Fatima, how do you bear to see shimmer upon the chest of Hussein on the 10th of Muharram? ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إن لله وإنا إليه راجعون. Please raise your hands and let us join each other in dua. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to hasten the reappearance of the awaited Saviour, to allow us to be alongside Him at all times in our life and in our death. We ask you, Ya Allah, if we are to pass away from this world before His coming, to raise us from our graves, so that we may partake in the victory of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. We ask you, Ya Allah, there are many people around the world going through such desperate times. There are those in a state of war and oppression, homelessness and poverty, those in natural disaster and disease. Ya Allah, grant them all safety, security and victory for the sake of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad. Ya Allah, allow us to perform the ziyarah of Fatima Zahra alayhi salam this year and every year, inshaAllah. And allow us, inshaAllah, to be with her on the Day of Judgment. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Fatima Hussein, Ya Hussein.
Ya Hussein.